Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, Baruch nuchem mibeit Adonai. Blessed are those who come in the name of love and for the sake of justice. Blessed are all of those who enter into the sacred space. It's a miracle to be gathering in the way that we do. And I'm so thankful to all of you who are here with us tonight for the second installment of what are planned to be 4 panel discussions on a range of themes that are very much at the forefront of all of our consciousness and where we are, both as a community in a, I guess, the smallest imaginable way, the small nuclear community of Romu here on the Upper West Side and wherever we are now in the geographical virtual land, and also obviously writ large for this country, for this nation, and for the globe. A number of years ago, I think it was on the Shabbat, right after the Muslim ban had been enacted, I spoke at the shul about what I felt was a radical rethinking of the oft mislabeled term given to the Jewish people, the Amal Sefer, the people of the book. I said that it's true. We have been a people dedicated to Torah, dedicated to wisdom, to learning, education, and so on. But fundamentally, in our deepest roots, in the place of our DNA, who we are not the people of the book necessarily, although we are that too. We are the people of the door. We are the people of the door. And I spoke about the magical way that the doorway became the birth canal for our people, and how forevermore that originally blood, now ink, stands as a perennial reminder of Our Lady of Liberty. On each doorpost, in each place where we just live, we set up a shamanic remembrance of what it took to be free. And not only did we do that, also the Torah commanded us to forever remember what it was like to be Gerim, to be those who were, as it were, refugees, or those who were strangers in a strange land, what it was like to welcome the stranger, not to oppress the stranger. No fewer than 36 times, there's a difference of opinion in the Talmud, no fewer than 36 times the Torah repeats itself and says, don't oppress the stranger. Be with the refugee, be with the one who comes to the door, for you knew what it was to be a people of the door. And I can't think of all of our esteemed panelists who are here tonight are remarkable, but it is my honor and privilege to read this poem from Dr. King's writings, where he paraphrased the poet Holland in speaking about this leader, where Dr. King wrote, "Give us leaders. A time like this demands strong minds and great hearts, true faith and ready hands. Leaders whom the lust of office does not kill, leaders whom the spoils of life cannot buy, leaders who possess opinions and a will, leaders who have honor, leaders who will not lie, leaders who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking, tall leaders, sun-crowned, who live above the fog in public duty and private thinking." There is, in the Jewish community, I can think of no one who wears the mantle of leader in all of the ways that it was just described than Rabbi Arthur Waskow. I met Rabbi Waskow at the old Eilat Chaim, which is around the corner from here. He was leading a Torah study in his own inimitable way one Shabbat morning, where he was including and weaving together all of the voices of the people in the room, honoring each person's insight and lifting it up and showing them how that too was a part of Torah. Rabbi Waskow is an inspiration to me, inspiration to generations of rabbis and lay leaders who come after his remarkable life and legacy. Rabbi Waskow, for those who don't know, Rabbi Arthur, you were born in 1933 in Baltimore, and that's the same year as my father too, but he was born in Berlin. You worked on disarmament and civil rights issues as a legislative assistant for a U.S. congressman. You were a senior fellow at the Peace Research Institute. You worked on issues of world disarmament and critically analyzed official approaches to nuclear deterrence and civil defense. All of this generation ago, right? In your first life, you wrote in a book called The Limits of Defense, and then wrote prolifically, eventually writing a book from race riot to sit in and running riot. This is all in your previous life before you had a remarkable awakening on the first steps towards your path when you wrote what is now famous, the Freedom Seder, the Passover Haggadah that wove together traditional Passover texts with passages from Martin Luther King Jr. and from Gandhi and Allen Ginsberg. All of these things, remarkable. It was the first Passover Haggadah to address contemporary issues and reach out beyond the Jewish community in this way. This was just the beginning of your remarkable career as a prophet for the Jewish community and beyond it. As a writer and a teacher and an organizer, your books are on my shelf and on, I think, all of my colleagues' shelves. God Wrestling and Seasons of Our Joy. These holy sparks, the rebirth of the Jewish people. I could go on and on and on, and I want to hear your voice, but all of these things are just the tip of the iceberg of your remarkable life, Reb Arthur. Just the tip of the iceberg. And I'll just say, I know that you have a new book coming out, and we're hoping to have a book conversation around your new book. But just one last thing that I'll say about you, and then hopefully you don't have any problem. You'll tell us. But so many of your chidushim, your new ways of looking at the world, have made their way into my personal rabbinate, from the ways that you see the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, as just the breath of God, the breath of God, or as you so poetically will say, that we breathe out what the trees breathe in, or to whether you speak about messianic, right? Le'ikbete de Mashiach. When you speak about messianism, you talk about the ways to bring about it. The laws of Mashiach are the ways that we might enact bringing about the world that is a perfected world. We could go on and on with the various ways that you have paradigm shifted the world for me and for many like me. And so it is an honor for us rather, to be with you tonight, Rabbi Arthur Waskow.
It's hard to imagine what to say, except thank you, for sure. Thank you. Um, the line in the Psalms, Lolanu, it's not, the honor goes not to us, but to the breath of life. Uh, and you have given the life energy that has made Romamu extraordinary and known as extraordinary, which are not necessarily the same thing, but in this case, they are. So thank you again. And picking up on what you said about what we're doing here, uh, and the breath, what unites us in this strange technology is simply being able to speak. And speaking is just breath. So what's uniting us is the breath of life uh, across all our strange technologies and differences and distances. Um, so some of us may be referring directly to Torah, and others of us only doing it, only doing it. But as Rabbi Kiba said, what's the point of studying? It's great. Study is great if it leads to action. So, in recognition of both the breath that we're all sharing and the Torah that we're all going to be speaking, Baruch atah Yah, Eloheinu ruach haolam, asher kitchanu b'mitzvot, v'tzivanu la'asok v'divrei Torah. And let us all say Amen. So even if we're muted, we can say Amen. So I want to begin with a line of Torah that I've been evoking in dealing with the refugee question. That seems to me extraordinary because, as you just said, David, 36 times there's a kind of general statement: be kind, be loving, be lawful, be law abiding with the visitor, the sojourner, the foreigner, because you were foreigners in Egypt. Um, and there is an extraordinary, just 2-line passage from Deuteronomy, from Dvarim, that I want to read because it's absolutely explicit, not even vague like love or lawfulness or justice. It's chapter 23, verse 16 and 17. You shall not turn over to his lord or master a slave or servant or serf, depending on your translation, who seeks refuge with you from his master. He shall live with you in any place he may choose, among any of the settlements in your midst, wherever he pleases. Don't mistreat him. Lo tenenu. Don't mistreat him. That's extraordinary. So precise. It's about what we would call a refugee from violence, from a violent government or a violent gang, or even a violent member of the household who is desperate, who needs refuge, asylum. And the Torah is absolutely explicit. Don't turn him away. The only change I would make is just in the pronoun them, not him, her, him, them, any of those pronouns. So once you've absorbed, or at least once I absorbed those two lines, it seemed totally obvious. Our founding myth is that we were a bunch of runaway slaves. So obviously, if you think of yourselves as, and in fact, year after year, every year, at least on Pesach, but all the festivals and Shabbat remind us that we were runaway slaves. Of course, you would assert that if a runaway slave shows up somewhere, don't turn him back. Don't turn them back, but give them a place to live wherever they get to choose. That's totally amazing. Wherever they get to choose in your territories. The 36 times that you mentioned that remind us we were pariahs, oppressed in Egypt, and therefore we should know the heart of the pariah, the slave, the outcast, and treat them with decency. I've thought a lot about that 36 times. If when I had young kids, had to tell my young kids something 36 times, it wasn't because they were doing it. It was because they weren't doing it. And I think the 36 has a double meaning. It's certainly over and over again because it's important. And I think also over and over again because it's not easy to get people to behave that way. It's too easy for people who were oppressed to say, oh, the way I'm going to do never again is never again for me, and I'll take as much power as I need to make sure that nobody can treat me that way, and that if that means more power than necessary, I'll do more power than necessary. And I think the Torah is over and over again saying, yeah, we know that it's easy to feel that way. It's a profound mistake. You should learn from the heart of the stranger, not to act like the Egyptian Pharaoh acted towards strangers. So I also want to pick up on one other major way the Torah tells about love and hatred towards strangers. It's the story, which the Torah is very good at. It's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in that story, somehow, Christian tradition has taken the sin of Sodom to be gay sexuality. But Jewish tradition never thought that's what it was. when the story describes the citizens of Sodom threatening to rape the two foreigners who had found refuge and a place to sleep in Lot's house. Uh, it's the hatred of the threatened rape that Jewish tradition views as the real sin of Sodom. In fact, uh, in the modern age, really, the great Rabbi, the Gaon of Vilna, one of the great towns called the Jerusalem of Europe, was such a place of study. The Gaon was a Rav whose job was to sit at the meeting of the Jewish City Council of Vilna and comment whenever somebody brought a new piece of legislation, to tell them his view in regard to the Torah about that legislation. He didn't have a vote, but he did have a voice. So if somebody brought a new piece of legislation that would have made it really hard for poor Jews from further east in Europe to come live in Vilna. Many of them wanted to because Vilna had a very good welfare system and was ready to welcome the poor Jews at least from further east. So the guy brought this um, resolution, this ordinance, this proposed ordinance, and the Gaon stood up and started to walk out of the room. And one of the council members said, Rav, you can't leave right now. Our custom is that we hear you speak about every piece of new legislation. So you can't leave now. Tell us what your thoughts are about this one. He said, new legislation? There's nothing new about this legislation. This is the legislation of Sodom. So for 3,000 years, Jewish tradition has been totally clear about what the real sin of Sodom was. There's another part of that story that I think we in America, this generation, need to pay some attention to. That's what I would call the sin of Lot. He protected his visitors from afar, and at some point in this collision, he tried to protect them by offering to send out to the crowd his two daughters, rape them, not my foreign visitors. The visitors, who turned out to be messengers from God, protected the whole house, so the daughters were not sent out to be raped. But Lot's willingness to do that reminds us, I think, that we must be open, welcoming, and just toward the refugee, the immigrant, the foreigner, and not to do it at the cost of shattering our own families. The Americans who feel that they are the forgotten Americans and that we, some of us, are so concerned about refugees and immigrants that we've forgotten that they are living cut off from jobs, cut off from the future, their life expectancy dropping for the first time in American history, deaths of despair from alcohol, from drugs, not overdoses in the sense that they choose, more and more of them choose to die from the drugs. From them, it's not an overdose, it was the correct dose to die from despair. And we need to be really clear that all the forgotten Americans and the forgotten refugees and forgotten immigrants, as well as the forgotten living in poverty and despair, in rural America, that all of them need to be lifted up, not forgotten by us. I think that's the basic teaching of that story of Sodom. I think the Torah is not teaching us to ignore either the refugee or the homeborn in trouble, in despair. And we should be addressing with justice what the Torah as a whole insists that we do address, that justice for all those who approach us, all those who are already in our midst. Dibarti, uh, I'll pause.
Manu, we hear you, Rav. We hear you, Rav Arthur. And if we still forget, at least let's really remember that for a lot of us, we would not be here had our families not been allowed to enter this country. Just saying. And note that Reb Arthur Roscoe has written a lot of books, and
Rabbi Mary, you're muted.
please know that that Rabbi Arthur's words here can continue for you. He has written a lot of books, and keep your eyes open for a book event at Romemu for his latest, for his latest, and which is called Dancing in God's Earthquake: The Coming Transformation of Religion.
And the link in the chat to that.
Amen, amen. And from Reb Arthur's wisdom, I'd like to welcome to our midst also Eddie. Eddie Calderon Chavez. Welcome, welcome to our community here.
Thank you for having me. Shalom, everybody. Buenas tardes. Good evening.
And Eddie, uh, give me a little grace here. I seem to have lost my your bio. So, friends, if someone in the group can read the bio of Eddie,
I'm happy to, Rabbi Mira.
yalla, go.
Hi, everyone. So I'm so pleased to welcome Eddie Chavez Calderon. Eddie is a social justice activist and the campaign organizer for Arizona Jews for Justice. He is a Mexican DACA recipient and former ICE detainee who now works with asylum seekers at the border. I'm going to say that in my connections with Eddie, he was the one panelist who asked me to text him, not email him. And I texted him because he was literally at the border working with asylum seekers. So from the trenches to the coast and everywhere in between, Eddie fights for a progressive movement that works towards a more inclusive, diverse America. Despite the many obstacles in his way, nothing has deterred Eddie from continuing to fight for the Latino community, as well as LGBTQ acceptance and inclusion, women's rights, economic justice, workers' rights, citizenship, and civic engagement, voter equality, and so much more. He is excited to be part of an interfaith coalition to continue to advocate for the dignity of every person, no matter their creed or national origin. Bienvenido, Eddie, bienvenido a Romemu. Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be able to learn and teach with you. Anytime we can learn and be joined and talk about Torah and social justice, I mean, the light of hope stays lit, right? Every time that we can come together and really in community work against all the systems of oppression that keeps our communities down, the light stays burned and illuminates so much more darkness. I wanted to talk to y'all a little bit about my story and how I really came into be, and kind of what shaped my life. When I was a small child, um, I was walking with my mom in the southern state of Michoacan, in a very rural area of southern Mexico. And as we were walking, as any other Hispanic, Latino, Mexican family does, we got up to get tortillas, to get bread in the morning. I remember walking by and smelling the air smelled so crisp. I remember feeling the cobble street stones under my feet and being so joyful to continue walking. But then things started to shift. The smell in the air turned weird. It smelled like trash, it smelled sweet, and it smelled odd, and I did not understand what was going on. And the black cobblestone underneath my feet turned into a different color. It was now a maroon, and I had no idea what was happening as I felt my mom grasp me close, and she held me as tight as she could, and she said, "Oh, we have to go." As my mom grabbed me, picked me up, and turned me around, I was able to get a glimpse of what looked to be a pile of bodies that had just been decapitated in my village. My mom ran home, and we went and talked to my grandma. And my mom had just been divorced. So this was the last straw for my mom of what she had seen. We knew that the cartels were acting up again, and we knew that they were targeting single women. And my mom, a freshly divorced woman, said enough. My grandmother pleaded with her, "Do not go, do not go, don't do it. Stay here, we'll figure it out, we'll stay here. If you must go, you go, leave him with me. I'll take care of him." My mom said I could never do that. So she sold everything she owned. Everything. She sold absolutely her everything, her jewelry, anything she possessed, she sold. And we made the journey from southern Michoacan all the way up to northern, the northern border of Nogales, which borders also Arizona and Mexico. We walked, we took buses, you name it, my mom and I did it. We would knock on doors, and my mom would tell people that just for a couple of pesos to get a ticket or a bus, we would clean their house and we would help cook for them. And we finally got to the border. Little did I know that our journey was just about to begin. As a 4-year-old, as many of you on this call who are parents understand that at a 4-year-old, it is very hard to keep a 4-year-old from crying or running into mischief. So my mom made sure that I had any sort of outlet to make sure that I was okay. We then got with our crew, who told us that we would be walking through the desert into the United States. My mom tied me up in her back, and she looked at me, took a deep breath, and she said, "Mijo, let's go. Vámonos." Throughout our entire journey, my mom would always talk to me and say these words in Spanish that she still talks to me sometimes today. And whenever I'm feeling down, she'll call me. And she would always tell me, "Vamos a estar bien," which means we are going to be okay. My mom didn't never tell me until she got to share a beer, but she told me that she was terrified because she was a single mom with a child who was crossing the border undocumented in a group full of men. We walked for what seemed to be weeks on end. We walked and we walked and we walked. 100-degree plus weather that continue to diminish our water, to diminish our food. From there, I began to see people sent into panic. Heat exhaustion kicked in. Folks didn't know whether north was south or south was north, but people just kept walking till we finally ran out of food and then ran out of water. Panic kicked in, and all we did was continue to walk. By the most desperate hour, we saw what appeared to be vehicles pulling up closer and closer and closer and more aggressively with no end in sight to stopping. and they pulled over as soon as they almost hit us. And a group of men got out and started yelling to me in gibberish. I didn't understand what they were saying, and my mom didn't understand what they were saying. All we could understand is that they were pointing weapons to us and told us to go down. So my mom went down with a child on her back, on her belly, in the scorching sand. My mom still has a little piece of her neck that's scorched and seared from the hot sand. We were placed under arrest behind a Border Patrol car, where my mom pulled her courage and used what little English she knew to say water and food. The Border Patrol agent, while taking his notes, turned around, looked at my mother, and this was the first time throughout our entire journey of migration that I saw my mom break. He turned around and he threw a pack of saltine crackers at my mom and I. And that's when I saw my mom cry. That was the first time I saw my mom cry. And all she could do is cry. We were then placed in a detention center, which I'm sure all of you have seen the images of the detention centers with the feces smeared on the floor, with hundreds of people packed tight, with folks not having access to the most basic needs. Well, let me tell you that 20 plus years ago, it has not changed. That it is the same. That what you saw in the news is exactly what I experienced. We went in and immediately I felt cold. I felt that everybody in the room had a sense of despair, women and children crying consistently. We did not know if it was day or night because they only turned off the lights for about 2 hours. Prior to 9/11, migration was different. We were able to get released. And by the grace of Hashem, we were able to cross into the United States. From here, I experienced what it was to remind myself that I was a child. We crossed into the United States, into a city that was called Tucson, Arizona, where a person helped us who drove us from the border to Tucson. And they said, I have to help you. Let me buy you a meal first. So we go into this restaurant, and my little mind is so blown away because I come into this restaurant that has a crown on top and a playground inside, and I am just flabbergasted with emotion. Something called King. As we order our meal, I get a little box, and inside of this box, there is what seems to be food, and then I experience something called ketchup, and I experience something called fries, and then I look at a sandwich, which from what I was told, you're not supposed to eat cold and hot foods because your tummy will ache. But my mom said it was okay. But there was more. Inside of this little bag, little box, was a toy. It was a little Pikachu toy. I remember that I looked at my mom, I grabbed it, and I ran back to the teller and I gave it to her because I knew that stealing was wrong and I did not order that. The teller looked at me and she said, honey, this is yours. And my mom and the ladies that helped us get to the restaurant started laughing. And my mom again said, vamos a estar bien. We are going to be okay. Now, my friends, this is but of 1,000 stories in the book of migration that countless people, not just from Mexico, but from all over the world that have to struggle with. My story is not unique. My story is but an echo in the screams of thousands and thousands of people. Now our advocacy has shifted into helping out asylum seekers who I've had the honor to be able to help more than 40,000 asylum seekers. More than 40,000 asylum seekers. Just this week, as Beverly was mentioning, we had a group of folks who were dropped off. And every time I try to tell myself, I'm not going to let it get to me. I'm not going to be emotional. I'm here to help people. but it always seems to get to me as the ice bus pulls up and I see children in shackles walk outside of the bus in shackles. One by one, they looked at me. One by one, asked me if they were okay. I can't help but see myself and my mom. Every time I see a family, it becomes personal from the spiritual level to the moral level. I think it's interesting that we go from do not oppress the stranger to you must love and protect the stranger as yourself. And I think that it's very important in Shemot to acknowledge that, because it's different from do not oppress, because that to me says tolerate. Because our advocacy is different when we just tolerate. But when we love somebody, when we truly love somebody, our advocacy goes far beyond tolerance. Our advocacy becomes a purpose. Rabbi Akiva said something that has stuck with me for a long time. The power of consistency, and how he talked about how a rock had been hollowed out by a single drop of water that kept consistently going over and over and over it. Immigration advocacy has the power of consistency. Sometimes it's not because we want it, because we have been failed systematically. Both parties have failed the immigration system. More people were deported in the previous administration than any other people. Our advocacy has to stay consistent, not just when it's something on the news, but consistent as things are still happening. We have to make sure that as we consistently bring in Shabbat, we consistently have our advocacy to step up for the gear. As we come into Pesach, as we prepare and get ready for our festivities for Purim, think about this in mind. I'm so excited and looking forward to our festivities because we're going to bring Purim to our asylum-seeking friends, which I laugh every time because I get some folks who have never known what a Jew is, and they ask me why I'm wearing a kippah. And I talk to them about what it means to be a Jew. And every single time I look at them, and every single time I always hear in Jewish circles that Tikkun Olam is important and that we have to make sure that that happens. But how can we fix the world if there's so much happening? It starts by fixing individual worlds, individual vessels with compassion, with strength, with consistency is how we change the world. Because as Jews, we believe that the change is within each and every one of us here, now, and we're doing that. But we have to make sure we are consistent. Because if it wasn't for the advocacy of somebody helping a person like me, I wouldn't be having a conversation with all of you. So my friends, as you bring in Shabbat, remind yourself to bring in compassion to the way that you advocate, to the way that you educate, to the way that you grow. Gracias, mis amigos.
Wow, Eddie, I'm almost not sure I can thank you because I'm so emotional. And, you said something about how, you keep being so moved and so moved. And I want to share with you that in the context of my role as a moderator, I was meeting with Reb Arthur and sharing that you were following him. And I shared your story and I started to cry. And I said to Reb Arthur, I apologize because I got so choked up I couldn't continue. And I said, Reb Arthur, I'm so sorry. And he said, no, you should not apologize. You know, I feel like the part where we need to apologize is if we stop crying. So I just want to thank you, Eddie, so much for sharing your compelling personal story, para su fuerza, su strength, your strength, y su coraje, your courage, and for your life-saving work with asylum seekers at the border, even right now, and for coming to educate our community while you're in the midst of doing this work. I literally engaged with you while you were at the border in our first contact. And muchísimas gracias y que Dios te bendiga en su trabajo. We're thanking you for the bottom of our hearts, and God should bless you in this holy, holy work. And I just wanted to say that Reb Arthur was quite humble and did not mention how many times as an elder rabbi he has been arrested, you know, in ICE, protesting ICE detention. And what an inspiration it was to me that an elder rabbi of my denomination was showing up for ICE detainees. And you have enriched my community so much. Thank you. Thank you. I want to let people know that you can direct questions to Rabbi Mira is going to be moderating. And if you can either, if you have a question either for Reb Arthur or for Eddie or for any of our speakers, you can indicate that it's specifically for that speaker or also general to the panel. So our next speaker, I am beyond delighted to introduce, is my friend and former colleague in the refugee mental health world, Dr. Adeyinka Akin Smith, who will now be referred to as Rabbi Yinka. I'm sorry, Rabbi, she is a rabbi. You are a Rabbi Yinka. Dr. Yinka, she is also a rabbi on that level. Dr. Yinka is a licensed psychologist and a tenured professor in the Department of Psychology at the City College of New York, the City University of New York, CUNY, and at the Graduate Center, CUNY. Dr. Yinka has cared for forced migrants, including survivors of torture, armed conflict, and human rights abuses from around the world at the Bellevue Program for Survivors of Torture since 1999. She has participated in human rights investigations in Sierra Leone and served as a joint expert on gender crimes and post-traumatic stress disorder for the International Criminal Court. She provides forensic evaluations, human rights consultations, and mitigation services on capital cases for private legal firms and public entities such as the U.S. Office of the Federal Defender. Additionally, Dr. Yinka is currently the principal investigator of an NIH-funded project to examine female genital cutting among African immigrants and service providers in the United States. Her work has included developing and examining mental health interventions in Sierra Leone and Nigeria. She herself is originally from Sierra Leone, and she has written extensively about service provision to and mental health challenges facing forced migrants. Yinka, it is such a delight for me to just, as my friend and colleague in this work, to welcome you to my spiritual community.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the members of the Ruma community for doing me the honor of an invitation to participate in this event. I am humbled to be on this panel and among such distinguished company. Having said this, I bring you greetings from my colleagues and our clients at the Bellevue Program for Survivors of Torture, people who I have had the privilege of working with and for since 1999. The Bellevue Program for Survivors of Torture is located within Bellevue Hospital Center. By the way, for those of you who may not know this, Bellevue Hospital Center was founded on March 31st, 1736. It is the nation's oldest public hospital. Since 1995, our program has provided psychological, psychiatric, medical, social, legal services to refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, and undocumented people, men, women, children from around the world who come to New York fleeing human rights abuses, armed conflict, and torture. Now, I know I don't need to remind all of you, but in the last several years, we have been inundated by a relentless flood of racist, anti-immigrant rhetoric. These xenophobic notions have repeatedly warned us that immigrants come to steal jobs and services. They bring crime, violence, and disease to sully our beautiful shores. Well, having heard this negative rhetoric repeatedly, I can attest to the fact that the human beings, the people we serve in our program, come fearing for their lives in search of safety. Many who come suffer from obvious physical trauma to their bodies, invisible emotional distress, such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, complicated grief, to name a few. Having experienced extensive distress before leaving their countries, during their search for safety, once they arrive here, they face more hurdles. Learning a new language, a new culture, seemingly endless separation from family and loved ones. We're talking about learning new laws, new social environments, the weather. Hey, New York, our subway systems, navigate those, people, right? In the face of all these challenges and more, they labor to restart and rebuild their lives, often from zero, as you've heard. In today's world, these struggles are further compounded by the additional harsh realities created by COVID-19, food and housing insecurity, diminished income and resources, under and unappreciated work. Your taxi drivers, people stocking shelves out there, the lengthy waits that people undergo while languishing in detention centers, yes, or in the community, for immigration courts, by the way, which have shut down because of COVID-19. They're waiting. They've already been waiting for years, but now they're waiting longer for the courts to open so the cases can be heard. At the Bellevue Program for Survivors of Torture, my colleagues and I are witnesses to the many lows our clients experience. But we are also witness to the strengths of their spirits and their incredible resilience and perseverance as they struggle to survive in the face of countless challenges. According to the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights, UNHCR, there are over 80 million people displaced around the world today. They translate that into approximately every 2 seconds, somewhere in the world, a man, a woman, a child is forced to flee for their lives. I highlight this number because in the last decade or so, the number of forced migrants has risen exponentially. Of these 80 million people, let me tell you something. Approximately 4.5 million are asylum seekers. What is even more shocking about these 80 million is that more than 40% of the world's displaced people are children. They're under 18, right? The crazy reality is that many of them go to neighboring countries that are just as poor and unstable as they are. So while we are afraid of them coming and stealing all our resources and bringing all these awful things, it's a very tiny percentage of those people that make it here, right? During the years of the Trump administration, the US has gone from leading the world in refugee resettlement for decades to a historic, I believe it's approximately 80% drop. So to me, the question for you listening to us on this panel becomes, how do we move forward? Is there a space at this American table for immigrants? Let me close my remarks by reminding everyone listening, if nothing has moved you by what my fellow panelists and I have said here this evening, please understand that no matter what the rhetoric is about displaced people, these forced migrants that we're talking about, the 80 million plus people separated from their families, forced to leave their homes, their communities, their countries, the 80 million plus who have experienced devastating losses, extensive traumas in their search for safety, for them, the people my colleagues and I work with, this is not a choice. No one chooses to become a refugee. Right? By that same token, you who are sitting here, sitting out there, watching and listening to us on this panel, my friends, you have a choice. You can engage in this issue by doing one of the following things: educating yourself about immigration policies and immigrant rights, donate to legal services, donate to organizations that provide services for this population. Volunteer your time, your energy, your skills, your talents. Call your local and state politicians. Hold them accountable. Protest. Rabbi also, Swasko, protest, right? Connect with immigrant communities. Assist those in detention. We can do that. Advocate for humane reform. Or you can choose to sit in silence and look away. In our email exchanges and discussion to prepare for this panel, my friend and colleague, Dr. Beverly Pincus, thanked me repeatedly and expressed surprise that I had agreed to participate at such a short notice. At the time, I couldn't really answer. I just kept saying, "Oh, Beverly, you're welcome, of course." But I've been wondering to myself, why did I agree to do this? Why did I jump at this opportunity? Well, another email exchange with another friend and colleague, Dr. Rachel Cohen of the Common Threads Project, clarified this for me. Dr. Pincus, Beverly, I now understand why I accepted this invitation. I realize now that I accepted your invitation because this is the first time in a very long time that I have had the opportunity, and I said this earlier, to engage in a real, not a theoretical discussion with people who I believe care about immigration reform. I am here on this panel because I care, because I believe you care about this issue and that we can do a lot of things. That notion, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to the angels without knowing it, comes strongly in this work. On this note, I'm going to stop. I thank you all again, and I really look forward to a rich discussion, a rich multi-log, because we don't have all the answers to follow. Thank you so much again.
Wow, Yinka, every time I hear you speak, and it's been many years that I've heard you speak, I'm just so blown away. And you know, I just am so beyond grateful that my community was able to hear this. And you know, I just want to reference something that our colleague in this field, Dr. Andrea Northwood of the Center for Victims of Torture, talks about. You know, I used to do training on vicarious traumatization, how people could get traumatized by working with traumatized people. And often when I was doing the work with torture survivors, people would say, "How do you do this? It must be so depressing." I was like, "No, it's so hopeful." And and Dr. Northwood talks about vicarious resilience, the incredible resilience of torture survivors, of asylum seekers, of refugees, of, you know, it is just, and we as Jews engage with this because we were refugees, right? We had this happen to us and we rose up again. So I just thank you for your voice, and for your graciousness in agreeing in such short notice to come. And I thank you on behalf of the Bellevue community too, but the Romumu community. Thank you. Our next speaker is Russ Agdern. Russ Agdern is a grassroots campaign manager for HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. He has spent the last 20 plus years working for social justice and the last 15 years working to build independent Jewish community. Before coming to HIAS in August of 2020, Russ spent 2.5 years as the founding organizer of RAC New York, the Reform Movement's state organizing project. Russ brings organizing perspectives from time in the union world, international labor rights, congressional community organizing, and the political and government world, where he spent 9 years running campaigns at just about every level of government and working in government. Russ came to work for HIAS in part to give honor to his great-grandparents who fled this country in the early 20th century. Russ, we welcome you to Romumu.
Thank you so much, Beverly. And I want to say, and I've heard this a few times already from my fellow panelists, I just want to say what an absolute honor it is to be here. First, to be a part of this conversation in the Romumu community, a community I've long admired and occasionally davened at. Really powerful co-presenters. It's especially a little sweet to get to co-present with Rabbi Arthur Waskow, who I had the honor to work with and learn from more years ago than I care to admit. So I am HIAS's grassroots campaign manager. I wanted to take a few moments to give you a quick background on HIAS, give you the big picture on where things are in the world right now in terms of refugees and asylum seekers. I know Dr. Yinka actually already started to get to that. Thank you so much for starting to highlight those pieces, and talk a little bit about some of HIAS's priorities and some of the actions that you can take with us. First of all, about HIAS. Who here has heard of HIAS before? Anybody heard of HIAS before? Great, a lot of folks. For those of you who haven't, HIAS is the Jewish humanitarian agency that works with forcibly displaced people around the world. We were founded 140 years ago in 1881 as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society of Manhattan's Lower East Side. In our first days, we met new Jewish arrivals to New York City, right on Ellis Island, and not so far from where Romumu's building is today. We provide kosher food to weary new immigrants who'd often been without food during their long journeys by boat, assisted with translation as they worked out to fill out their immigration paperwork, provided temporary shelter, provided all of our male clients with that famous HIAS $12 suit so they could dress the part for their interviews. HIAS continued to grow in the US and across the world, joining forces with related organizations to build an operation that helped Jews emigrate here or elsewhere. We would coordinate visas and documents, provide complex resettlement services to those who needed it. Now, throughout our history, we rescued Jewish refugees, whether they were fleeing pogroms in Tsarist Russia, the horrors of the Holocaust, or persecution in Iran, the former Soviet Union, Cuba, or Egypt. And we provided the same services that we did in our earliest days: food, housing, job assistance, medical care, and translation assistance. In our roughly first about 120 years, HIAS resettled 4.5 million Jews to the United States of America and helped countless more to arrive safely in other countries as well. In the last several years, our mission has expanded in response to the urgency of a global refugee crisis and based in our Jewish values and history. HIAS works with refugees from all around the world, regardless of their race, religion, or ethnicity. As our CEO, Mark Hetfield, once said several years back, we used to do this work because they were Jewish, and now we do this work because we are Jewish. We are in, and I'm going to share screen for just a moment here. So we are now in 17 countries across the world, helping folks resettle here, but also providing services on the ground in a lot of those countries as well. Again, as Dr. Yinka said, not everybody is coming here. We want to make sure to support people wherever they are, wherever they happen to be. And HIAS is the grassroots organizing home for the Jewish community that wants to advocate on behalf of refugee and asylum seekers. We work primarily with refugee and asylum seekers. I want to talk a little bit about definitions here. Refugee is a person who has been forced to flee their home country due to persecution because of their race, religion, nationality, political opinions, or membership in a particular social group. For example, members of the LGBTQ community. As Dr. Yinka said, nobody chooses to be a refugee, right? The persecution of a refugee experiences may include harassment, threats, abduction, or torture. Refugees often afforded legal protection by the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, their host government, or both. In the United States, refugees are hand-selected by the US government and subjected to a whole variety of background checks and multiple security screenings by multiple agencies. An asylum seeker is a person who has fled persecution in their home country and is seeking safe haven in a different country, but has not yet received the legal recognition or status. In some countries, including the United States, asylum seekers are sometimes detained while waiting for their case to be heard. As a few of our folks have alluded to already, we are currently facing the worst refugee crisis in recorded history. 80 million forcibly displaced people, approaching 1% of the entire globe's population. 26 million refugees, 4.2 million, approaching 4.5 million asylum seekers. And yeah, 40% of the world's refugees are under the age of 18. 67% of them are from five countries, Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Somalia. 85% of them, again, as Dr. Yinka, I should have checked in with you. But I mean, it really drives the point home, right? 85% of refugees are actually being hosted in other developing countries. And UNHCR reports that 1.4 million people are in need of immediate resettlement. It is not an exaggeration to say that the previous administration significantly shrank the refugee resettlement program of the United States in the last 4 years. Before they left office, the previous administration set the fiscal year 2021 admission ceiling or presidential determination at 15,000, that's 15, the lowest in the 40-year history of the United States resettlement program. The previous year, FY20, the presidential determination was 18,000. That was the second lowest year. And only roughly a little over 10,000 refugees were able to arrive. The FY19 was 30,000 and the 18 was 45,000. You could see that this was a real precipitous drop. The last year, the Obama administration had set out to make the presidential determination resettling 110,000 refugees, but this was lowered to 50,000 by President Trump via executive order. Now, seeking asylum is legal under both the United States law and international law. In order to be granted asylum, a person must meet the definition of a refugee, but seeking it is legal. Individuals should be able to seek asylum at a port of entry between a port of entry at the border or once already in the United States. And any effort to deter or block individuals from seeking asylum is illegal under both United States law and international law. That did not seem to deter a lot of the action taken by the previous administration to try to stop people from seeking asylum here. There were a lot of really bad policies around these issues. We had cases of metering, where Border Patrol agents were turning asylum seekers away at port of entry. We had cooperative agreements with other countries that required asylum seekers to be returned to that country to seek asylum there. And we had Remain in Mexico, as most folks know it, or the legal term, the Migration Protection Protocols, MPP, which forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their immigration court hearings. there were additional that wasn't all, right? There were additional problematic policies around asylum as well. All of them designed, we speak in Judaism about walls around the Torah. Every one of them designed to be a barrier, and a barrier that would slow down advocates in terms of trying to overturn them in court. So they would, you would fight it. We would fight one rule in court, and we would get it overturned, and then there would just be another rule that would work to serve some of the similar purposes. So we had the asylum ban, the first attempt at it. We had the second one, which barred individuals from arriving through another country. We had proposed asylum regulations, which made it nearly impossible to even seek asylum. And then with coronavirus used as basically an attempt to just completely shut down any possibility of entry. The good news here is that we have, while there's a lot of work still to do, and I really resonated with what Eddie was saying around we have to be consistent, we have to continue the work. There is a new administration that seems to be taking some of the right steps in the right direction on refugees and asylum seekers. They're already working to make some significant changes. President Biden already announced a goal of 125,000 refugees into the country for FY 2022, and is exploring a significant increase of this year's determination. He hasn't finalized it yet. And honestly, there's been so much damage done to the system that there needs to be, we want to see change as quickly as possible, but we also understand that there needs to be a significant ramping up of the system before we're going to be able to bring in the kind of people we would like to bring in again. The State Department and Department of Homeland Security are actually already reviewing some of the adverse refugee and asylum policies. MPP is already beginning to be repealed. We had folks in San Diego, after 2 years of waiting, finally beginning to be able to cross the border to have their cases heard and be in the United States while their case is being heard. That just happened at the end of the week. But most importantly, all of these things are great, but again, to echo what Eddie was saying, and also what Dr. Yinka was saying, and Arthur as well, Rabbi Arthur as well, the fact that we've got an administration that seems to actually care about this issue and want to do well on this issue is not a reason to stop. It's actually a reason to fight harder. The network of advocates that work with HIAS around the country have spent much of the last 4 years in a really defensive position, trying to ameliorate the worst, trying to stop a terrible thing from happening, right? This now, in this moment, this is an opportunity to step into this fight at a time where we actually might be able to make some real progress. So in terms of what we are looking for from this administration and the new Congress, first, we do want to see an increase in the number of refugees that will be allowed into the country. We think it is possible to raise it significantly, even with the understanding that the system needs to be rebuilt. We want to see the bans that gutted refugee protections in the United States rescinded, including passing the No Ban Act, which includes safeguards from such bans happening in the future, right, by passing it through Congress. We want to see adequate funding to rebuild the overseas and domestic components of our resettlement program. We want to see an end to the harmful policies that deny asylum seekers due process, right? I didn't even list all of them in I had 2 whole slides. I did not even list all of them. But there are some real significant changes that the administration can make and give folks the full opportunity to seek asylum. We want to see an end to asylum detention, and we want to see all asylum seekers released from detention and have there be real alternatives to it. We'd like to see legislation to modernize and improve our country's refugee and asylum system, particularly the Refugee Protection Act once it's finally reintroduced. And we want to see family separation ended in all its forms. Well, it didn't have the form, this previous administration was the most egregious form. It was unfortunately not the beginning of that policy, and we want to see the Biden-Harris administration end it. So, what are some ways that we could do that? We want to take concrete action, right? So first of all, I want to talk very briefly about our Welcome to Congress campaign. Now, highest, and this echoes a point that Eddie made, that we're not just talking about toleration, but we want to talk about love. For highest, that expression of love has been through welcome. Welcome is a big part of who we are and how we think about the world and how we think about our work. So we wanted to welcome this new government to Washington by letting them know that they have constituents that want to see them prioritize this issue, right? Refugees and asylum seekers did not get any assistance in any of the stimulus packages that were out there for dealing with Corona. This is an issue that's important, and we want to make sure legislators know that they have constituents that care about it and will fight for it. So I'm going to pause my screen share for a second because I'm going to switch it. We have a card that looks like as in its current form, it looks a bit like an online petition. But what we're having folks do is circulate this document within their communities and having folks sign on to let their members of Congress know that we care about this issue. And once we're done collecting signatures, my colleagues in the highest communications department will work with you to create a nice looking document that you could then send to your member of Congress as a community to say, we want you to prioritize these issues. And if you want, we want to prioritize these issues, and we'd like to meet with you to discuss that. And if you have leaders that want to meet with your member of Congress, we are happy to. We will be providing materials and talking points and training around all of those issues. And you could see it's very similar to an online petition. And I believe if somebody from Romamu can chime in, I believe Romamu is on board, albeit not yet on the drop down, but will be soon this week. Is that correct? Do I have that right, Beverly?
Yes, that's my understanding from my intersections with you and Rabbi Mira. The Romamu community, Rabbi Mira and Rabbi David signed Romamu on in January. We just have to get ourselves on the drop-down menu. And as part of the Social Action Committee, I am going to be organizing our initiatives around immigration, and I can follow up with you so that our congregants can engage in this step. And so you will have opportunity to intersect with me again. And people who are watching from Romamu who are interested in the immigration initiatives, I will be starting that. You may put your email, and Lauren Jacobs will be collecting those so we can hook you up with me for a task force on immigration. But for sure, we will be happy to work with you on this, Russ.
Fantastic. And I want to just briefly wrap up because I know we want to make sure we have time for questions. In addition to our action around members of Congress, in addition to advocacy opportunities, there are also opportunities to volunteer to support refugees here with Highest New York. We're always looking for pro bono attorneys that we could connect with. And we have an operation on the ground to help folks at the border. We're always looking for lawyers and translators who may be able to help us support asylum seekers remotely. I'm doing this work, and this is in my bio. I'm doing this work because I've built these skills over this last while of working in the justice world, and I have an opportunity. I'm only alive because my great-grandparents were able to come to this country. And I want to make it so the Wolf and Yetta Agderns of today have a place where they can go, where they can have a safe haven and they can find a home. And I'm excited to work with the Romamu community to make it so more people have a safe place that they can call their home. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be a part of this conversation.
Russ, thank you so much for speaking with us and engaging us in the call to action. As I said, you may put your emails in the chat for people who want to connect with me through the Social Action Committee for work on this immigration. I just want to say one thing. Russ, I really relate, and I think many of us on the call relate that Jews were refugees. We ourselves were refugees. And my grandparents were from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and Romania, and were refugees to Colombia, tried to get into the United States where they had family and were not able to because of the quotas, wound up in Colombia, which is why I'm a Jutina. And while I was working on this, which on February 4th, Colombia issued very sweeping legislation to give rights to Venezuelans who are crossing the border. Colombia is host to more than 1.6 million Venezuelans. The crisis in Venezuela has been horrible, as we've seen in the news. And I was so proud as a Colombian that the Colombian government, it's one of the most progressive legislations around this issue, to create special state permits that will benefit Venezuelans for 10 years. And I will also say my mother is Colombian, but one of her brothers had moved to Venezuela many, many, many years ago. So I also have family in Venezuela who we've been very concerned about. And so it really touches me directly, which is how I engaged in the work and how I came to want to work in refugee mental health. So I want to just thank all our panelists. This has been amazing. I am just blown away, and I hope that that is how our community is feeling. I also want to say that we had a very, very quick turnaround on this from our criminal justice panel, which Ruth Messenger was one of our speakers. She's here tonight. I just want to say that these 4 panelists agreed to do this at a drop of a hat. It was literally 2 weeks that I put this together. And as Dr. Yinka was saying, I said to her, as just my friend, I'm so sorry I'm engaging you with all this pressure. And she speaks to like why she's here. And that is also why I got so involved in the work, because it is a moral imperative as Jews. And this has been done to us. We must always remember that we ourselves were in this position not so terribly long ago. There are people still alive who had this experience of force of this. And so we're going to open up the Q&A, which Rabbi Mira is going to moderate. And you may address to Rabbi Mira a question to either a specific panelist, Reb Arthur, Dr. Yinka, Eddie, or Russ, or in general, a general question for the panel. We also invite brief comments, please brief, so that we can have a lot of engage as many people as we want. And I invite the panelists to engage with each other, because each of you, I have to say, when I met with you, had read the bios and were very, very interested in each other. So I want to encourage that as well. Rabbi Mira, please, if you have any questions for us.
So here's one for Russ, and I'd also like to offer this to the rest of us, our panelists. Here's a question. I haven't seen the new immigration bill yet, but does it include an end to asylum detention? That's part one. So perhaps Russ or
I know that the actual language of the Citizen Act was the U.S. Citizenship Act was literally just released Thursday afternoon. I'm not certain that it has an end to asylum detention. I can work to double check to try to find an answer, or if one of my colleagues on the panel has the answer, I'm happy to hear from you. But I'm not certain that it does.
Yeah, I didn't see it either. We had a team of our lawyers look it over. We're actually on some similar coalitions with Highest, where we interact on various levels as well. And we haven't seen anything that truly addresses that aspect.
so perhaps Eddie also and Russ. Another one. Is there any appetite from any of the major refugee or human rights organizations for filing civil cases or criminal cases against the past administration, particularly those who carried out illegal activities, such as, child detention, violation of the Flores Agreement, family separation?
That's another good question. I can say that I know that Hyas has tangled a lot, especially at and before my time. I'm still relatively new on the team there. I know that Hyas has tangled a lot with the previous administration in court over a lot of the bad a lot of the bad rules that I listed out in other situations. I don't know if we're looking at criminal stuff beyond the fighting, the actual legal framework. I'm not certain. I've not heard anything about that, but I hear whoever asked that question, and I hear their uh, I hear their frustration and anger at the treatment of people by some of some of those policies and some of the folks that enacted them.
Most definitely. Just to echo off of that, and I may go against the grain here, and I may make a couple of folks uncomfortable when I say this, but as a person who's directly affected, who has lived undocumented the majority of his entire life, if we were to go after the policies of the previous administration, then we would have to go after the policies of every other administration before then, because the immigration system has been systemically broken for such a long time. The one difference that we have seen is that the previous administration was very vocal about it. In fact, they wanted to champion how they were working the system. And to a lot of people, they say, well, Eddie, the system is broken. And I respond, actually, it's not. It's working as it was intended, as it's supposed to work for the folks to obtain power. So if we were to go at it from that angle, then we would have to hold accountable so many other people and other folks in office to truly make us a true systemic change.
I hear you, Eddie. I hear you.
Vera, I
A
wonder,
pivot question. Who am I speaking over?
it's Arthur
Dr.
Watson.
Binka?
I wanted to pick up on that global and holistic view that Eddie was just talking about and broaden it a little bit. As several of the panel have said, no one chooses to leave their language, their country, their neighbors, their families. They're forced by certain circumstances, by violence often. And the background of that for many refugees in this era is the climate destruction that is creating famine and forcing and encouraging violence because there's no other way to get food to eat. So I think a holistic view would also include United States action to deal with the climate questions and to deal with, at the neighborhood level, with reconstructing the societies where people, in fear of their lives, in fear of their limbs, want to become refugees only because of desperation. I think we need to be thinking that way too, not only about what happens inside the United States.
So, Reb Arthur, perhaps since we are going in this direction, and to Reb Arthur and to all of you, so a question now about the practical difference between do not oppress the stranger and love the stranger.
Well, of course, that passage I read from Deuteronomy, absolutely. Never send anybody back to an oppressed situation, and then let them live wherever they choose within your boundaries. That's love. That's not toleration. That's absolute love. And I think a commitment to encourage the recreation or new creation of decent societies in the rest of the hemisphere would be a really act of love on the part of the United States.
Yes, and it's not just about sending them back. It's sending them back to that master, right? That particular master that was the source of oppression. That's a big difference. There was somebody on the other side that
Oh,
was
yeah.
oppressing, right? And you do not send them back there.
But the reverse was let them live, welcome them, not let them, but welcome them to live wherever they choose.
The questions are coming in fast and furious. Eddie, what kind of cooperation do you get with Border Patrol?
You know, it's very weird. Border Patrol has a mixed relationship with us. On the one part, they don't like me personally because they see my advocacy on the news. But on the other part, they have to work with me because if not, they look bad. They used to just drop people off randomly in the streets, whereas now we'll get an email with exactly times and dates of when folks will be released. So they have to work with us. We have definitely seen a shift in almost the behavior of how they're working with us due to the shift in administration. But it's a very awkward meeting every time we see each other. Um, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't care about that. I'm focused on the families that are here, you know. So if I have to bypass that awkwardness, then that I have to bypass that.
I just want to add, we've had this very interesting experience at our program where families, individuals have shown up from the border where by Border Patrol, they were given 462, for those of you, 462 First Avenue. For those of you who do not know that address, that is the address for Bellevue Hospital Center. So they were given our address and said, go there. And so these people show up and they're thinking maybe there'll be some housing, and it's like this huge chaotic structure. So, you know, again, just saying here's an address, go there, that is not being supportive, that is not being helpful, that is not constructive. In fact, it's further traumatizing. And we've had it happen on several occasions in recent years.
Yeah, definitely. And to echo off of that as well, like here in Phoenix, folks were being dropped off, specifically indigenous folks who did not speak Spanish or had any money, were being dropped off at a Greyhound bus station. So at like 11 at night, I would get a call saying, Eddie, we have a group of 300 people who are just outside. And then you think to yourself, well, ICE is technically placing them in a place of transport. But one, folks don't speak the language. Two, folks don't have access to resources to be able to purchase tickets. Three, folks don't understand the system of how it works. For a lot of the people, they were heavily indigenous. And I'm not just talking about indigenous from Central to South America. We had folks from Kenya. We had folks from Russia who had zero idea of how any of our systems work. So in turn, ICE was setting up people to fail. They have to reach a court date. They have to know how their ankle bracelets work. And ICE does not at all follow up with those procedures.
And of course, there's a general question about what is being addressed about ICE, reducing deportations, or is this is a question for the next administration too?
If nobody else wants to take it, I can go ahead and take it. I think that this is what happens. And when we talk about systems of oppression, we talk about how cyclical things are, that one thing affects the other thing. And in this case, we see that the issue is facilitated by the private prisons. So here in Arizona, we have a lot of heavy things that are run in our immigration centers by private prisons. So when we have asylum seekers tell us that ICE was hurting them and not feeding them and that ICE was throwing their food away, Then they say, ICE says it wasn't us, it was the private prison. So then the private prison says it was ICE. So then there is no accountability on who to go after. And unfortunately, we've been trying to reach our elected officials who sit on those tables. And then it just goes back to Homeland Security. And then Homeland Security tries to blame either one of those two agencies, and it just gets lost. There has never been an accurate way to show some sort of structure that holds folks accountable who are hurting and dismantling families, because we know based off of the data of how terroristically ICE works to not only harm, but to target people and bring in fear. So it's very, very difficult to hold accountability. You would have to go after everyone.
Maybe we ought to be thinking about a totally different ICE, a totally different ICE. That is, what if it were made up of social workers? What if it were made up of people who have been teachers of immigrants and refugees to the United States? My wife, Rabbi Phyllis Berman, for 37 years, ran an extraordinary school. The people who taught in that school got to know immigrants and refugees at firsthand, and indeed made loving connections. What if those were the kinds of people that met immigrants and refugees at the border, not people who were oriented to semi-sadistic at best behavior?
If I can interject for a moment, this is a perfect time for me to, I don't know if we're going to be able to grant her like access to actually speak, but Reb Arthur's wife is here, Rabbi Phyllis Berman. I have known Rabbi Phyllis for 2 decades already, and I say she is one of my womenters. That is what I say to her. Rabbi Phyllis started the Riverside Language Program in 1979, and it is a school that engages, refugees and immigrants. She started the school when it was originally funded by the state education department, and she was literally walking the streets of New York City looking for a home for this ulpan, an intensive English language program for people from all over the world relocated in New York City. And Red Phyllis has sent this to me privately because we can't access her voice. So I'm speaking on her behalf. Not one Jewish congregation responded with open arms, though several churches offered space. And for 37 years, the Riverside Language Program found a home at Riverside Church under the leadership of Reverends Bill Coffin and Eugene Laubach. And 6 months after her retirement in December 2015, Riverside kicked them out. And she's proud to say that B'nai Jeshurun opened their doors to the school. If image, Reb, this is Reb Phyllis's words, not mine. I'm just the conduit. She says, if immigrants and refugees are not an American Jewish issue, then I don't know what is. Thank you, Reb Phyllis, for your comment. I don't know if there's any way to
Yeah,
give
she's
her-
unmuted. We can hear her.
Okay, great.
One of the things that I said, a number of our students were helped by the Bellevue Center for Survivors of Torture. Over the years, there are so many different advocacies. We've heard some from you, Eddie, some from you, Russ, and my advocacy was a little bit different. My advocacy was for an intensive English language instruction. In the adult education world, where people went to school for a couple of hours a week, it would have taken 5 or 10 years for people to master English enough to get to work. Some of our students had never gone to school a day in their lives, but others had PhDs in their country. And the loss to us of what their gifts could be was enormous unless we could really use them, which meant intensive English. And that meant support in our country for them to be able to come to school full time. We know now that there are countries around the world that have universal health care, not like our country. Well, there are countries around the world that have a couple of years of support for immigrants and refugees so that they can learn a language, so that they can learn some work that is needed by the country. But that has not been most of the practice of our country since I began the school in 1979. And that's part of the fight. I wanted to change the way our country and our state thought about adult basic education. It doesn't have to be 2 hours or 5 hours a week. It needed to be for language learning 25 hours a week. And then in 6 months, people were ready to get out into the world. And that was what I was trying to do. I kept arguing that the investment in supporting immigrants and refugees for a short period of time would produce people who could make a living and not have to remain on a welfare system and could make a real impression on, and a real value to people in the United States. Over the course of the years of our school, because we were in Manhattan, we saw people from the 5 boroughs. They commuted often for 2 hours a day in each direction, just as I did, living in Philadelphia to New York each day. We saw people from 75 different countries each year and speaking 36 different languages. And because they were not in a school where everyone spoke the same language, they learned English because they liked the people who were in their classes, and they got to learn something about what it means to be both different and the same, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of politics. They got to see that under the skin, we are all human beings. And this is a teaching I wish we could teach people who have lived in this country for so many years. Anyway, I'm very proud of Romamu and all of you who've put this program together for bringing this back into the center of attention. When I started Riverside, the Soviet Jews were coming here in great numbers. And then the Vietnamese and Cambodians and Laotians came here in great numbers. And then the Cubans and Cuban and Haitian boat people came here. And then the Romanians and Poles came here. And then people from Tiananmen Square, Chinese people came. And then the Bosnians came. And all through the years, the Latin Americans came. So we had in our school people from every conflict and every difficulty all over the world coming here, not because they chose to, but because they had no choice.
Rabbi Phyllis, I think that, our committee is a very small committee, the Social Action Committee, that came together in the wake of George Floyd's murder to, to elevate social action at Romamu. I'm so thankful to Rabbi David and to Jeff and to all the clergy for giving us an opportunity to bring this kind of teaching to our community. And I think it's, what you said, like, if this is not a Jewish issue, what is a Jewish issue? And I have to say, I am so moved by the people who have shown up tonight. And one of the people, we have 2 other people I was wondering if we might be able to bring into the conversation. One is Ruth Messenger, who is here, who is I believe, the former director of HIAS and also American Jewish World Service, working with in developing countries. We also have Dr. Hawthorne Smith, Hawk, who is Dr. Yinka's husband. He is the director of the Bellevue Center for Survivors of Torture, also a former colleague and friend. And I was hoping we could allow Ruth Messenger and Hawk access to engage in this very rich discussion.
So I think the program is fantastic. It's really said almost everything that needs to be said. I had nothing to do with HIAS except to be a huge admirer of HIAS and to underscore the point that Russ made, which is those of us who know HIAS know its work in the United States over decades, but I've actually seen HIAS programs with refugees all over the world. So they help refugees from Kosovo in Albania and refugees from Sudan in Chad, where I actually saw their project there. So they are a global program for immigrants. The only point that I would add to this, because I think it's all been said, I believe this is a critical issue today, a critical issue for the Jewish community. So 2 points. One is we are beginning to witness, and we'll see more and more immigrants who are immigrants because of climate refugees. The UN estimates right now that there are 25 million refugees who are fleeing either droughts or floods and can no longer, or sometimes the theft of their land, can no longer survive where they would like to be. And they are immigrants on the move. And that's just a whole new population that we have barely begun to think about. And the other thing I want to say, because with some hope right now, I think Russ will agree, the endless push for people at our southern border, where we have had, as we all know, appalling policies, and where it looks like there might be some new policies. I just want to say that those policies need to include thoughtful American aid to Central and South American countries, because the reasons that people flee are because of no land, violence, corruption, gangs, literally murders of members of their families. If we went back to and expanded a thoughtful aid program in places like Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala, there would be much less need for people to flee. And to underscore what several people have said, people really want to be able to live where they live, where they grew up, where their roots are, where their families are. They are on the move because of the situation in their countries that brings them to borders and makes them ask for asylum, et cetera, et cetera. So if we invested thoughtfully in fighting corruption and oppression in Central and South America, we would greatly enrich the future for the people who live in those countries, and we would also lower the pressure for immigration into this country.
If I may interject, I am really so loving this discussion, and we're beginning to run out of time, and I just want to give a minute to Dr. Hawthorne Smith, my friend, my colleague in the refugee mental health world. He and Dr. Yinka are the power couple of refugee mental health. He's the director of the program of survivors of torture. If you can stay brief, Hawk, and just wrap us up, and then we'll move on to the closing part of our program.
Thank you so very much, Beverly, and thank you very much to the Romemu community. I really came to this party late, so I don't want to step on what other people have already said, but I was just scrolling through a couple of screens and just seeing so many familiar faces and so many powerful folks, and it's just amazing what a community can do. I'll look at my wife's face. She's definitely the driving force of this power couple. Did you speak at all about FIFO, LIFO? No? Okay. One aspect that I think doesn't get spoken about very much in terms of asylum seekers, we focus a lot, and rightfully so, on what's happening on the southern border, and particularly the horrific familial separations that are going on. But in many communities around the country, we see sort of an unseen family separation crisis that has really been greatly exacerbated over the last 2 or 3 years. And very briefly, I'll say that it used to be, say, for example, if Beverly needed to flee her country and come to the United States, and she came 3 years ago, and I came last week, you would think that Beverly's case would be adjudicated before mine. Just makes sense. That's how it was for many administrations. It was called first in, first out. But what has happened since 2018 is that the administration in place flipped things on its head, sort of thinking that most of the people coming in, their cases are frivolous or what have you. And someone like Beverly might have already been plugged into services here. Maybe she has her employment authorization or Social Security or what have you. Someone like me, without so many ties, they figured they could quickly deal with the case and get me out of the country. So what does this mean? It means that someone like Beverly, who has been separated from her family for years, now has to go to the back of the line behind people who are just arriving recently. I had a group session just on Thursday where people were going through a conversation, Francophone African survivors, about, do you even pick up the phone when your family calls and your children are asking you, Daddy, Mama, when will I see you? And you have no answers when this process has shut down. And we are in a situation now where we hope that there is a thaw. We hope that there is a great deal in terms of resources brought to bear on all aspects of this. But something that we might be able to advocate for that won't cost a great deal of money, will have a great deal of impact, is reversing this last in, first out conception that is making people sit and drive our Ubers, do the essential work during this pandemic, but separated from their families for years and years. I'll be brief, so let me stop that there just as another issue we can talk about. But again, I just want to commend you. I want to thank you. It's amazing what a community can do. Beverly and team, thank you for putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us out, Hawk. It has been such a delight to reconnect with my friends in the refugee mental health field. And thank you for supporting me in bringing this issue to my spiritual community. It was so important to me. I do want to remind people, if you are interested in engaging at Romamu in our immigration initiatives, so please put your email in the chat, and I will be, as the person organizing our initiatives, following up with you and how you can engage in all the different ways that you have heard tonight. I want to thank all the panelists again, Reb Arthur, Dr. Yinka, Eddie Chavez Calderon, and Russ Agdern. I think Eddie needs to go because he has very crucial work he's doing at the border. So I just want to say thank you, Eddie. Otra vez, muchas gracias, muchas gracias. We are sending all our blessings to you in your work, Eddie, and we hope you are safe and the people that you are working with can rebuild their lives. I'm going to transition this to Lauren Ahava Jacobs, who's the co-chair of the Social Action Committee, with some announcements. And we are going to close out with a song that you should stay for because you do not want to miss this song as the ending. So I want to recognize also Tal Siegel as the co-chair of Lauren and Tal holding a vision of social action at Romamu, what it could do, what we could do. And this is the second of an incredible series. You're going to hear more. And I will turn it over to my friend, Lauren Ahava.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beverly Pincus. I want to reiterate your thanks of all of these absolutely amazing panelists. I want to thank Rabbi David, Rabbi Mira, Aliza Rifka, Julia, Rebecca, Max, the Social Action Committee, and of course, Dr. Beverly Pincus, who for many years has developed and directed counseling programs for refugees and immigrants. So she's very much in this field. I believe that I've said all the lovely and wonderful people that we just saw in this beautiful slide. If we can all just take a breath together. I'm going to put in the chat all the links that you have seen this evening so that any link that spoke to you, you can go back to and find yourself at your leisure. And at the end of that list, you'll see Romamu Social Action is socialaction@romamu.org with immigration or immigration reform or immigration issue in the subject line. And we will absolutely respond to you that way as well. We want to invite you to join us. We're going to be having many upcoming events, and the committee is excited and proud to welcome all of our upcoming speakers and events. So please write to us and join us. And of course, as part of our announcements, we want to remind everybody about the upcoming Refugee Shabbat, which of course is a project of HIAS. And the services for Refugee Shabbat will be Friday, March 5th and Saturday, March 6th at Romamu. And there'll be additional programming through HIAS on March 6th and 7th. And as a registrant of this event, as Dr. Pincus alluded to earlier, we'll be emailing you some additional goodies from HIAS and things you can do at home and things you can do with us. Of course, it's Purim. We are in a Shushan state of mind. So Monday, the
And you gotta
20th.
sing, Lauren. You gotta sing that. You can't just.
I'm in a shoe shine state of mind. Mhm. How's that?
Yeah, Lisa Sokolov, you, all of you guys sing.
We'll give it to Lisa. We'll give it to Lisa next time. So on Monday, February 22nd, we got Hamantashen at Home, a virtual baking experience with the unparalleled Jamie Askin. And then on Thursday, February 25th, we have Meditation and Megillah starting at 6 p.m. and the incredible Purim Party with Sandra Bernhard and Rabbi Yah with our DJ in the house and Cole High at 8. Purim is in the house. And Purim Day on the 26th, we read Megillah with Morning Minyan with the Rebbe's and the Chazans and everyone together. Chag Sameach, it's all coming and we want you there. There's also a Mishloach Manot fundraiser with Mandala Cafe. We love them. We're partnering with Mandala Cafe and they're terrific. Daikin is here with and for us and we can't wait to have you be part of that. And of course, Awaken Strength through social action. Save the dates, folks. Sunday, April 11th, Children's Rights and Welfare in conjunction with Shabbat of the Child Weekend. We can't wait to bring that to you. Sunday, April 25th, Housing and Food Justice. And then in May, on the 20th, Healthcare and Mental Health Care Reform. So in case you were concerned that we wouldn't get to everything, we are getting to it all in good time. And we appreciate all of your participation. For more information and registration links, romamu.org/announcements. So we are so thrilled to have you all here and so thrilled to have you all with us as part of the work that we're embarking on as a committee and as a community. And as we offer you a beautiful song, Dr. Pincus is going to tell us about it before we listen to it. Folks, it's unparalleled, so just get ready.
Don't leave before the song, but thank you, Lauren. Our executive director, Jeffrey Kahn, would like to say something. I got a message. So can we allow Jeff to just have a moment? And we're still going to get you out by 9 o'clock. So Jeff,
yeah,
please.
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I just thought we would be remiss if we did not say that for over a year, several members of Romu, happens to be my sister, but that's that isn't the point, have been working with an organization on the Upper West Side that that has helped resettle refugees, many refugees in very, very dire situations that are coming into the New York area. And for over 2 years, for over a year, we've been employing several refugees that have been waiting their turn at getting out of the tenuous immigration status with ICE. And there have been many members of this community that have been helping those people. So, we are, I'm proud that we Romu have been able to help some people on the ground by giving them jobs and allowing them to earn a living here. So I hope that we can continue to do some of the great work that this panel has talked about, as well as continue to help the people that are cleaning our building and helping us every day. So I just thought it would be worth mentioning that. But thank you, panel and everybody. Amazing program.
Yashikach, Jeffrey. Yashikach, Deborah.
I don't know, David, did you want to say a comment before I close us out?
No, I just want to, I mean, listen, it's been a year. It's been a crazy year, obviously. And in many ways, as I started with, when I talked about us being the people of the book, I was so influenced by Ruth Messenger and the trip that I took with AGWS and recognizing how globally we are interwoven. And if there was ever a truth that we know now to be, not up for question, it is the interdependency that we have and that we rise and fall with one another, and that right. And so it's a new day has dawned. It's and I was very taken by what Russ said about how important it is now, right? Because many people over the last 4 years, we knew the overt sins, as it were, of the previous administration, but even before that, it was such a big issue. And so it feels really great that you, Bev, spearheaded and energized us to sit together and listen to some very deep truths that we had to hear and very personal stories. and to all of the remarkable panelists and courageous people who are on the front lines helping day to day with, looking and standing in the presence of a holy, a holy human being and trying to do God's work. So to the teachers that were here, Rabbi Phyllis Ocean Berman, and to Rabbi Arthur, to you, the two of you, what most of, I can speak for myself, if not everybody who's ever been in your presence, that we learned something new. And I've already received private chats from people who were blown away tonight. So thank you to Lauren and to Tal and to Rabbi Rivera and to everybody who made this evening just a really holy night. It was really beautiful. It's full of Kedusha and sanctity. So let's hear the beautiful music you're going to bring, Bev. We can't wait.
Yes, and I just want to just to say again, thank you to my friends and colleagues, Dr. Hoffman Smith and Dr. Adeyinka, and to Reb Arthur, Reb Phyllis for engaging in this, and Eddie, who has left to go to the border probably, and Russ. And I would be remiss if I did not give a huge thanks to Eden Sidney Foster, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to help bring this off. The content and the vision was mine, but the implementation and so much of the implementation was Eden. And so I welcome all of you who want to get engaged to please, again, email. I will be following up. And this song is a song by UNHCR, the UN Agency for Refugees. You will be hearing refugee voices and asylum seeker voices and some graphics that will bring the refugee experience home. And with that, we can have our song. And I thank everyone for participating tonight, the panelists, the audience, Ruth Messenger, of course. Really such amazing, Rabbi Dayan said, private message.
You muted yourself, Bev.
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm not muted. Sorry.
Now we can hear you.
Thank you so much. I think we have the song. Excellent.
کمانی سازیم عشق را درون خود یابه نوید تازه را از سر جهانی سازیم کینه را از قلب خود رانه مهربان باشیم با هم از دل بخندیم هر دم شادمان باشیم با هم زندگی کنیم دور ورزید دل را به کام هم دیگر بستید عشق و محبت سرمایه ماست در راه خدمت باشید همانگاه Let's do this, it's our که تا چراغ محبت برافروزیم زندگی را با هم آسان بسازیم. It's time to shine your light. It is time to shine your light. Shine your light.
So, friends, it is time to shine our light. Let's get engaged. And thank you also to the whole Social Action Committee, in addition to our co-chairs. We've done a great job. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all. Shine your light.
Shine your light. I found a good song, David, right?
Beverly, beautiful.
The link to the song is in the chat before we close the night. So if you want the song, you can get that there too. Toda. Gracias, toda.
Toda. Gracias.
Gracias,
Buenas
gracias.
noches for everyone. Much love.
Thank you, David, for being with us tonight. It
Of
really,
course.
I'm so happy you were
Thank
able.
my kids for not ruining it.
I'm so happy you were able to hear this and really engage also with some people who are important to me personally and
Beautiful.
professionally.
Beautiful people. We'll do it again. We'll have more. Yeah, sure. Everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.